everybody, welcome to the channel and thank you so much for joining me. In this video, I am going to answer the most common question that I get by far in my Facebook community, the Kettlebell Gym. This is a community that has over 130,000 members, and I moderate somewhere between 50 and 100 posts every single day. This is the number one question that I get asked, which is actually kind of surprising. Now, it is asked in a number of different ways, but here we go. The question is, how do I program my kettlebell workouts? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about in this video. I want to share with you, before we get into it, one quick reflection for myself, is that this has been a really difficult video for me to create. And the reason is because, as you can see, or as I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to break this video down into some sections. And the real answer to this question is, how do I create my kettlebell program, is it depends. It depends upon your abilities. It depends upon your limitations. It depends upon your goals. It depends upon the equipment you have. It depends upon the amount of time that you're going to dedicate to your training. It depends upon so many different things that there really is no right answer. Therefore, in order for me to really give guidance in an area that has so much nuance, it turns into an hour-long video for each bullet point, and then nobody actually benefits from it. So what I'm doing in this video is I'm going to gloss over a lot of information. I'm going to try to boil it down to the most important things that you need to know right off the bat in as short of a time period as possible. But please understand that this is in no way a complete response to this video, because like I said, that could be a 12-hour video series if we really wanted to get into detail. So with that said, I'm going to share with you guys what we will be talking about in this video and the topics that we're going to cover. We're going to start off, I'm going to give you a perspective, a way of looking at your programming that's going to guide you. And with this information, we can get through a lot of the nuance, or you can learn how to make sense of the things that are more nuanced about your personal program, as well as I'm going to give you a way to categorize your programming, okay? We're going to talk about 3, 4, and 5 workouts a week, how those might be planned. We're going to talk about workouts where you're splitting them up by movements or by specific lifts, where you're focusing in on one particular thing, and also workouts where maybe we're doing complexes. We're going to talk about exercise selection, progressing your training, and also acute variables, okay? So there's quite a few topics we're going to discuss within this. And like I said, as we touch on these, we're going to gloss over them. We're going to go through them pretty quickly, but those things we are going to talk about. You may want to grab a notepad. I'm going to give you some pretty good information in here, so you might want to write some of this stuff down. Let's get started. Let's start off then with perspective. What is my perspective, my approach to creating my programs? An approach that you may be used to is a bodybuilding approach, where we categorize our workouts by muscle group, okay? When we train with kettlebells, I'm assuming in this video that you no longer are interested in muscle isolation and bodybuilding, but now you're interested in performance, because kettlebells are not a very good muscle isolation tool. So I'm taking the liberty of making the assumption that you are an individual who is more interested in performance, athletic performance, whatever that means to you. And for that reason, this shift in the way that we look at things is more due to that than it is the tool that we're using. Does that make sense? So this philosophy would apply when you do pick up dumbbells or barbells or maces or sandbags or whatever in the future. When we categorize, for example, bodybuilding workouts, we do it by muscle group. When we categorize kettlebell workouts, what I would encourage you to do is categorize them by movement. Now, write this down. Remember what I'm about to share with you. This is what we call the 7 primal movements. I'll go through them slowly and that way I don't have to repeat them. The first one is squat, okay? Hips down, chest up, movement, okay? The next one, bend. By the way, these are in no particular order, but kind of in order. Bend, this is hips back, and there's more forward lean. This is also in kettlebell what you'll commonly be referred to as hip hinge. Bend or hip hinge, same thing. And then lunge, okay? So far we've said squat, bend, lunge, and then we have twist or rotate. This is primarily thoracic and lumbar rotation, but it would also include rotation within the hips and multi-axial joints like shoulders in certain movements, okay? Rotation, and then we also have push, upper body push, chest press, military press, pull, rows and pull-ups, for example. And the seventh one is gait, walk, jog, run, sprint, climb, and carry. All of those things fall under the category of gait. I'm not going to get deeply into gait because it is such a wild card. It can be programmed into your gym workout. It can be programmed outside of the gym in so many different ways that it's kind of a wild card. But please understand that when we talk about these 7 primal movements, it's not just a matter of doing them. It's also a matter of doing them with good alignment and good posture in a way that's efficient for your body. Let's talk about how this might look. Again, we're going to leave gait alone just because that could be a different conversation. And we're going to talk about the first 6: squat, bend, lunge, twist, push, and pull. Okay? Remember or realize that squat, bend, and lunge, lower body, big muscles, generally requiring also a lot of core. And because of the amount of muscle being utilized in those 3, more energy is being utilized to perform those movements, as well as more oxygen. So they're going to get your heart rate up more quickly, okay? So what I do is I will generally do squats on a Monday, for example, hinge or bend on a Wednesday, and then lunge on a Friday. So I'm separating out, this is a 3-day split. I'm separating out these high energy demand, big muscle group lifts so that I have plenty of energy when I come to them on their days. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the other 3 movements, push, pull, and rotate, to one of those days, depending upon what I'm doing. As a default setting, but definitely not as a hard and fast rule. Remember, none of this stuff is hard and fast rules because there's so much nuance in this topic, it's unbelievable. But as a default setting, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll squat and pull on Monday. For example, I'll hinge and push on Wednesday, and then Friday lunge and twist. Why do I pair those accessories with those other movements, with the squat, bend, and lunge? The reason that I do that is because I want to really take into consideration my grip strength as I'm training. Most of the exercises that we're going to be doing with kettlebells will require a lot of grip. If I'm doing a kettlebell swing, for example, heavy kettlebell swings or a kettlebell snatch, that requires a lot of grip. Now, if I was to go from that into pull-ups or bent rows, my grip isn't getting a chance to rest. And what's going to happen is the prime movers that drive the swing, the glutes and the hamstrings, or the muscles that do that pulling, the lats and the bicep, they're going to actually not fail. They're not going to fail, but the grip will. So I'm really actually on that day, on that bend and pull day, I'd really be training grip, not bend and pull. So I tend to put bend with push. Chest presses, push-ups, so that when I'm swinging, I'm not pulling. Does that make sense? Therefore, I'm going to squat and pull most of the time. Squats work really well. Pull-ups. Squats don't take a lot of grip. You're kind of resting the weight in the rack. Even the goblet hold is not that difficult for your grip, generally speaking. And so because squats tend to put less stress on the grip, I'm going to pair that with a pulling exercise. Lunge and rotate work really well together. By the way, if you want to put that into one beautiful combination, Turkish get-ups work really well. There's a lunge and there's a windmill pattern in that Turkish get-up, which is a beautiful rotational exercise that you can do with a kettlebell. So lunge and rotate, sometimes I will also, and to piggyback onto what I'm saying here, on lunge and rotate day, I may actually do an exercise that force generates lunge and rotate, and sometimes even push. So we're actually getting a combination of 3 movements, okay? So this is a very functional movement pattern. Lunge, twist, and push. It's how we throw a ball. It's how we force generate when we have to push off of the back foot. And so lunge and rotate work very well. We can separate those out as a Turkish get-up, or we can force generate into those 2 into a sequence for another particular exercise. As I'm sharing with you here, one thing that I'm kind of alluding to is that some exercises are a combination of multiple patterns. A kettlebell snatch, for example, is a bend, a rotate, and a pull, okay? So when we're categorizing, just try to think about the primary point of force generation for that particular lift. So with a kettlebell snatch, we would consider that to be a hinge pattern. The rotate and the pull, those are just helping out. Those aren't the primary point of force generation for the snatch, okay? So keep that in mind. But as we get more technical with our training, we do start to combine exercises in that way, and that's a beautiful part of kettlebell training, that we can do that. Okay, so that will help you to understand how to categorize, how to look at your programming, and how to put together a 3-day program, okay? If I was doing a 4th day, a lot of times on a 4th day, I actually will do a 2nd day of bend where I am doing a windmill pattern, because this is what I would call a unilateral bend pattern. It is still a bend pattern, but it works the body so differently than the typical bend and also than the squat and the lunge, that I will put this into its own day, typically I would say 90+% of the time, with an exercise called a bent press, which is a very highly technically demanding variation of that unilateral, that one-sided bend pattern that I'm sharing with you. But if I'm doing 4 workouts a week, which I usually do, then that's what that 4th day is going to look like. Also, incidentally, I will usually separate lunge and squat, one at the beginning of the week, one towards the end, because they do share a lot of muscles in common, a lot of hip flexors and quads, and I don't want to put those too close together, so I'll separate those out a little bit. I find that the hinge pattern, they don't interfere really. That doesn't interfere with lunges, doesn't interfere too much with the squat, so usually I'll squat or lunge early in the week, hinge in the middle, and then squat or lunge towards the end. If you don't want to do that 4th day with the windmill pattern or the bent press like I'm sharing with you, and you want to integrate that bend pattern into the unilateral bend into your regular bend day, that's fine. If you want to, what you can also do on that 4th day or on the 5th day is train into a weakness. That would also be a recommendation that I would make to you. If you find that when you squat, your back is always rounding right before your hips even get parallel, or your femur gets parallel to the floor, your hips get level to your knees, your back is rounding, okay? You find something like that, or you're shifting your weight, or when you lunge, you're kind of wobbly and your balance isn't good. Take that extra day that you're training, where you've worked already most of the patterns, take that extra day and lean into a weakness with very moderate load and a very moderate intensity. Remember, we don't want to work out today that's going to take us many, many days to recover from. What we want to do is actually take it easy and bring the tempo, so slow the exercises down a little bit and practice technique within whatever it is that we're struggling with the most. That's a wonderful way to add the 4th or 5th workout to that 3-day split that we've already talked about. So that's what I would recommend. Just like I said, make sure if you're really working into that weakness, do it in a way that is not going to take you a very, very long time to recover. Now let's talk about complexes. And kettlebells lend themselves so well to complexes because you can transition from squat, bend, lunge, twist, push, pull, and gait so fluidly from transition to transition that it's very enjoyable, right? It's very enjoyable to do this. And this is one of the most important things that you can remember when it comes to creating your program. So write this down. We've got the 7 primal movements. That's gold. This part is gold too. My question to you is this: what are you training for? And what are the demands of your sport? If I'm training for jiu-jitsu, for example, when you're doing jiu-jitsu, you simultaneously have multiple things that you're doing. You're posting on one leg, you're trying to wrap the other opponent's foot with your other foot, you're pulling down with one hand, and you might be trying to hold on to the wrist or the back of the head with your other hand. You're also trying to breathe while this person's leaning on you, or maybe they've got their forearm in your throat. So you're doing all of these things with a lot of stress and also a lot of fatigue. Your nervous system in this situation is having to multitask. If you are doing a sport that requires a high degree of complexity, especially simultaneously, one of the best things you can do is teach your nervous system how to multitask in the gym. If you're doing simple exercises in the gym and you think that that's going to translate over to the mat or the pickleball court or anything like that, it's not. If you need agility, train agility. If you need coordination, bring in coordination. This is where complexes can be so powerful. So we're going to train into what it is that we need. If I was training a long distance road cyclist, I would not spend very much time with them at all doing complexes. If I was training a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, 100% I would. If I was training a pickleball player, I would. If I was playing a tennis player, I'd have them transitioning and moving in different directions constantly. And so we're going to change up our training based upon our goal, and that's where complexes can be a very powerful thing. I kind of broke down with you about pacing out the 3 to 5 day workouts, especially if you're doing 5 days. Take a day where it's easy. Well, how do we do that with complexes? What I'd say with complexes is such a wild card. Now we're talking a level of nuance that is very, very difficult to even comment on from my position, because the variables of intensity, how heavy you're lifting, and volume, and how difficult that workout is for you, and how long it took you to do, and all of these things, and your current abilities, it's impossible to say, do this, do this, do this many times, right? So when you're creating complexes, understand that if you're doing 3 to 5 complexes a week, that might be fine. You're generally never going to failure, not even close. You're not even looking for hypertrophy, okay? If you're doing hypertrophy, you need to give your muscles days to rest. The only way we can get away with doing complexes, meaning squatting, lunging, and bending 3 or 4 days in a row, is if we're not getting to hypertrophy within each workout. As soon as we get there, we need rest. So you've got to keep the volume very moderate. And what you're going to do is you're going to work those complexes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, for example, or maybe Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, you take that middle day off. And over the course of the week, you might start to notice that it starts to compound a little bit of soreness, a little bit of overall fatigue. And then by Friday comes around, it's time for you to take a couple of days off. That's not a bad way to train. You just have to be really mindful of the fact that, hey, if I'm squatting multiple days in a row, I'm using those same muscles multiple days in a row, I have to understand that I can't train the way that a bodybuilder would train those muscles, where I'm exhausting them and taking them all the way to hypertrophy. You've got to leave a much more gas in the tank when you're doing it this way, okay? But again, there's a lot of benefit to complexes. You'll know your complexes are right when the limiting factor is the nervous system, and that your technique kind of suffers a little bit, and you miss a step, or you move incorrectly. You're supposed to snatch and you clean and you get it out of whack, and your nervous system is constantly the one that's the limiting factor, and it's not so much the muscle groups. If you're training for a sport that really requires a lot of coordination, you'll know that that's when you've hit that sweet spot. So let's talk about now exercise selection within these categories, and also in this dialogue we're going to talk about progressing the exercises that you're selecting. So when we think about bodybuilding, and when we program for bodybuilding that you might be used to, that's just why I reference it, we really track our progress with 2 things. It's either volume or intensity. The exercise stays the same, but you're doing more reps of 225 pounds, or your 1 rep max increases. That's how you track progress. When we change to a athletic style of training that is movement based, we actually have a whole new world of progression available to us, which includes, yes, volume and intensity, but it also gives us the opportunity to become more technically difficult in the exercises we're performing, which really doesn't apply when you're isolating muscles, but when you're using the entire kinetic chain to create a force generation sequence, and you're learning how to tame and control a extrinsic load like a kettlebell, especially at a very high rate of speed. Okay, the technical proficiency required to do that is very, very high. And we have to build that skill one level and one layer at a time. Okay, so when you think about progressing your training, exercise selection is a part of the progressions here, not just the acute variables. Got it? So when it comes to selecting the exercise within each category, one of the questions that you might ask yourself is, what is my razor's edge of proficiency? Meaning, what can I do? It's an exercise I can do with good form, safely, but in order to do it properly, I really have to stay focused. And not every rep looks the same, and not every rep is perfect, but for the most part, I've got the move down. I'm just working on it. What exercise did I leave behind? For example, if I'm now working on the 2-hand kettlebell swing, it's difficult, but I mastered the deadlift, which is the milestone before. So I know I've earned the 2-hand kettlebell swing, but I'm still practicing it. That's your razor's edge of competency. We're not ready to swing or a 1-hand swing, an alternating swing, and snatch and do all of these things yet. We haven't earned that yet, because we earn those exercises by mastering the 2-hand swing. So what is your razor's edge of competency within each category? So that might be one question that you would ask yourself. If you've perfected your deadlift and you want to get more results in less time and you want to learn how to swing, then that's your next step. And then from there, the 1-handed swing, and so on and so forth. Staying on that razor's edge of competency. However, there's a certain point where you say, okay, what I'm training for doesn't require an extremely high level of technical difficulty, so therefore I'm going to stay at a certain level. Again, if I'm a road cyclist, I'm not going to be doing things that require a tremendous amount of coordination and agility. I'm more interested in power and endurance, right? On the other hand, of course, if I'm training for something that does require a lot of coordination, I'm going to increase the technical difficulty of my training layer by layer, level by level, so that my nervous system trains and becomes running at peak efficiency, operating what is already here more efficiently. That's what you're doing. It's like hardware and software. The software is the nervous system, the hardware is the muscle. Most people don't realize they're running a very low-end software, and they build big muscles. They have good hardware, but the software doesn't know how to use it properly. When you train things that are highly technically difficult, you're getting that nervous system to use what is already there on a whole new level. So when you're progressing, that's one question to ask yourself. The next question, one question is, what is my razor's edge of proficiency? The next question is, what am I training for? And how technically difficult is that thing? Let's move on to acute variables. When you're learning an exercise, your volume of reps and sets is going to be determined a lot by your intensity, which is to say that when you're learning an exercise, you're going to be using a weight regardless that is very manageable. We're not using 1 rep max weight to learn an exercise. So the volume of reps and sets is going to be determined a little bit by the weight that you're using, which is going to be pretty light. But also, if I'm training somebody how to do a kettlebell swing, I know they're not going to learn at 1 rep at a time. We're going to need to string 10 to 15 reps together. I need a set that's going to be long enough for them to make adjustments, to correct things, to feel the movement and make adjustments as they go, hoping that the final rep is better than the first rep, hoping that the final set is better than the first set, and overall that each rep starts to look the same. Because you'll notice when you're first swinging, every rep is wildly different, and it's very hard to critique that form. Say, well, on rep 3 you did this, on rep 5 you did that, right? But we want every rep to look the same, and we want them to get better and better rep after rep, set after set. And we're going to do that with rep ranges of between 10 and 15 reps. You're going to do that with an intensity and a weight that can be performed for 10 to 15 reps without fatigue causing degeneration of form. Okay? It's really important when you think about the degeneration of form, whether it's coming from fatigue or whether it's coming from the nervous system learning the exercise. If the nervous system is learning the exercise and it's just not quite dialed in yet, a little bit of deviation in form is not the end of the world if you're doing it with a safe amount of weight. If fatigue causes degeneration in form, that's when it's time to put the kettlebell down, okay? So your acute variables when you're learning an exercise are going to be very different than your acute variables when you're using that exercise to improve performance. When I'm using an exercise to improve performance, generally speaking, my volume is much lower and my intensity, the weight that I'm lifting, is much higher. Part of that is because that's what I enjoy. A part of that is because the heavier kettlebells will give you more feedback. More feedback is what is necessary for you to improve your form. And so if you're constantly pursuing better and better technique, you'll need heavier weights to give you the feedback in order to make sure that you're doing it properly. However, if you're an indoor soccer player and you're playing for 60 minutes and you are the star player and you're out on the field most of the time, you may want to do a workout that's higher volume and lower intensity. Okay, really depends. Pickleball players, tennis players, all of this, any sport that requires a lot of endurance and long-term endurance, you may want to shift to a higher volume, lower intensity. Okay, so your acute variables, just to recap, when you're learning, stick to 10 to 15 reps in a very manageable weight. Make sure that the weight that you're using is no heavier than what you can perform 10 to 15 reps without fatigue. Okay, then once we start to use a performance, now it's your freedom to say, what do I need? And for me also, what do I love to do? So there you go. Hopefully that answers that question. I'm going to turn this video off. I'm going to cut this off because I think that I've done a pretty good job of not talking too much. And partly it's because I held on to this piece of paper that had all of my points and kept me from getting off sidetracked. So hopefully this really helps. What I would like you to do for me is I would like you to help my algorithms by liking and subscribing to my channel if you think that this content is worthy of that level of support from you, and I hope that it is. But what I also want you to do is I want you to comment. Yes, because it helps my algorithms, but also because, like I said, this is such a nuanced topic that now we can actually start to expand on this. And I want to know what you guys are going to ask based upon this, because I know that probably some of the things I said left more questions than answers. You're like, oh, well, you said this, but you didn't really elaborate on it. And well, I've got this thing going on and this, and how would you train for that? So in the comments below, provide me for that. And then again, I go through about 100 questions or posts every single day in my Facebook community. And the questions that really do get asked a lot, I just create more videos for you guys. So definitely your comments will help me to do that. And if not, I can certainly respond in the comments. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.